Okay. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to Springfield City Hall. The time is 5:35. Today is Monday, March 10th. This is a committee of the whole meeting scheduled to discuss the topic of accessory dwelling units and the new Housing Act of 2024, its impact on our local zoning. Councilor Allen has been studying this issue closely and working with a variety of department heads on the subject. And we want to thank all the department heads and members of the public for being here today to talk about it. Councilor Allen, why don't I let you start it off? So everybody knows we do have a meeting scheduled at 7, and we have public speak out at 6:45. So we definitely can't go more than 6:45. So that gives us about an hour and 10 minutes if we need it all. Councilor Allen?
Thanks, Mr. President, and thanks to everybody for coming. Basically, the program is Mike opened. I'm just going to talk for a minute and then hand it over to Phil to give us an update on what activity there's been on this so far. And then we'll just have people come up to the podium with the questions and answer the questions. We have one set of answers from Keith O'Connor that he wrote into us. We really just need to hear, the idea of this was to have a dialogue because we've had, everybody's concerned about this, but we haven't really had any organized approach to figure out what we can do. So this isn't a start, the idea was this is a start where we'll hear from each other what you think the issues are, and maybe there's some ideas that'll come out of it that will lead to some potential amendments to the state law and all that sort of thing. We don't know, that's why we're here. So I just asked Phil to just give us a couple-minute update on from his point of view and what's happened, has there been any activity, et cetera, and then we'll just call you up one by one to address the questions.
Okay, before you do that, Phil, I just want to acknowledge the councilors who are in attendance in person and remotely. We've got in person Councilor Allen, Councilor Delgado, Councilor Click Bruce, and myself, Councilor Fenton. Remotely, we have Councilor Santinello, Walsh, and Perez, as well as Davila. We also have representatives from Representative Pupilo's office. Bruce Adams is here, and I think I see Eliana Gutierrez from Rep. Gonzalez's office. So thank you all for coming, and Phil, you've got the floor.
Good evening, Phil Dromey from the Office of Planning and Economic Development. Again, just quickly, as everyone is probably aware, this ADU law, accessory dwelling unit law, spurs from the last year back in August. This particular amendment to the State Zoning Act was passed as part of the larger Affordable Home Act. It was signed by the governor back in August 2004, went into effect in February of 2025. Basically what the law did was move ADUs into kind of a protected class of zoning, so it limits what cities and towns can do to control the use of ADUs. Specifically, the law itself requires that a city or town cannot require an ADU to get a special permit. It also can no longer require accessory dwelling units to either be the principal building or the accessory dwelling unit to be owner occupied. As I've said in previous meetings, ADUs themselves are not a new use. A number of the surrounding communities allow them now, but most of the communities that allow ADUs did have specific regulations. A lot of them required special permits, and the big one was a lot of them required that you had to be an owner occupant in order to do an accessory dwelling unit, which, known in the past as kind of the in-law apartments. But one of the biggest changes to the law that was passed was that now ADUs can no longer be required to be owner occupied. Again, either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit. There are limitations to size of the ADU. It can either be half the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller. So if you had a 1,000 square foot ranch, the biggest you could have is a 500 square foot accessory dwelling unit. You know, obviously, the largest you can go up to is 900 square feet. And the accessory dwelling unit includes, it can be a converted basement, it can be a converted attached garage, it could be an addition to your house, or it can be actually a quote-unquote tiny house or cottage if you have a big enough yard. Again, all the requirements for the underlying zoning, your setbacks, your dimensional requirements, your height, rear yard setbacks, those all have to be followed. An accessory dwelling unit is considered to be, you know, a single-family residential unit. So, you know, you need in Residence A, you need a 10-foot side yard, you need a 30-foot rear yard. Again, it's important to note the law itself specifically stated that ADUs were only allowed in single-family residentially zoned districts. So in Springfield, those would be Residence A and Residence A1, which is, it's kind of scattered throughout the city, but the primary is, you know, A1 is only really in 16 acres. Residence A is kind of throughout Springfield, but primarily in kind of the outer areas of Springfield. So again, the law itself went into effect back in February. I've had a number of calls from folks curious about what they can do. Can I turn my garage? Can I turn my basement? So far, we've actually only had one homeowner actually fill out an application, submit a plan, and receive approval. This was, you know, to me, this is an example of what ADUs were primarily for. This owner is actually an owner-occupied house. He's building an addition for his mother-in-law. So that did go through the full site plan review. We had a couple back and forths because his original plan was 910 square feet. He then had, you know, so there was a number of back and forths between the plan he submitted. But ultimately, after consultation with the building department, they did meet all the requirements, including the parking. Again, he had a two-car garage with a good-sized driveway and a pretty good-sized lot, so he was able to do that. So again, I've had a number of calls. I've had calls saying, you know, people looking to run to Home Depot and buy a shed and put that in their backyard. That's not going to be allowed. Again, if you're looking at if you have the room to put a tiny house in your backyard, you're looking at a foundation, you're looking, you know, it's not going to be can't be a trailer, it can't be a shed. So there are certainly building codes that will come into play. So at the end of the day, as I've kind of mentioned before, you know, some of the questions that you've had, it's hard for me to say what the impact's going to be. Again, after a month, I've had one application. Obviously, if in the next few months I have 300 applications drop on my desk, I'm in trouble, but I haven't had those. I think, you know, looking at the one that was approved, the addition that they're talking about is a significant investment. You know, it's probably in the $80,000, $90,000 to do that size of addition he was doing. So again, I think the city, for the kind of the last question, what actions should we take? I think the city is taking all the actions it can at this point. You know, as I mentioned before, if changes are going to be made, those really have to be made at the state level. I haven't heard from other communities besides what I've read. I know Agawam's mayor is not happy with the changes, specifically the owner occupancy part of it. That is a big change and certainly one that can impact neighborhoods. Again, I'm just not sure how many people are going to run out and do these. So it's hard to say what the overall impact is, but they certainly have the possibility of impacting single-family residential districts if everybody runs out and does it. You know, one of the concerns I have is with new developments, you know, subdivisions. I'm not sure if these developers are going to all build new homes with accessory dwelling units. We'll see. We don't have many on the books right now, but so I don't know if you have any other.
Interesting one, because if you go out Allen Street, just past Socialite, you know, past McDonald's and Wendy's, and then past Bicentennial Plaza, and the next thing after Socialite on the right is a new housing development. And Walter couldn't make this tonight. He had a conflict with his own Civic Association meeting. But he's concerned that they haven't put up any houses yet. And he's thinking, like, are they going to put them up? He thinks they're Walter kind of thinks like this about, what could go wrong with something. And he was thinking they could put them up with accessory dwelling units as part of the thing. Could they do that?
Absolutely.
They could?
I mean, each one of those houses is going to have to go through a site plan review, but could they? Absolutely.
Okay. So we have, looks like, I think, 7 other departments here on the list to get through. So we want to just go through them one by one? Okay, so next is economic development. I see Brian Connors is here remotely, at least I think so. Hi, Brian.
Yeah.
We'd turn it over to you to say a little bit about ADUs and the impact that you see and what actions, if any, can be taken. Before you start, I do want to recognize we're also joined remotely by Councilor Whitfield. Thank you for joining. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I mean, I don't have vastly differing opinions from Phil. We work in the same department. We've probably talked about ADUs dozens of times. I would agree with him. I think it's, the impact is something that's going to be a bit of wait and see, because it is questionable whether the cost of constructing these to code is really going to be something that somebody would get back in the market value of their property. So, yeah, and I think it's also fair to say at this point we haven't seen a rush of applications yet, but that certainly could change. On the positive side, I guess I would say, from businesses and employers that I talk to, certainly having more housing units in Springfield is a good thing. We certainly want to make sure we do it in a way that's responsible and doesn't impact our neighborhoods greatly. But even as the city of Springfield, as an employer, I could tell you, when we hire somebody from outside of the city, how difficult it is for them to identify housing in the city. There's not a lot of choices, so certainly creating more units is a good thing. In terms of adjustments that could be made, I would agree if at the state level there could be a change to require owner occupied. I think that would give some comfort to a lot of the concerns that are out there. I don't know if that'll happen, but I think, at this point, as just to echo what Phil said, I think the city and the council has done what they can do to this point under the existing regulations. But yeah, certainly if it could go to owner occupied, I think that would be a good addition. But beyond that, I don't have anything additional from what Phil's provided.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian? We'll do some questions at the end too, but Councilor Delgado?
I had a quick question for Brian, because this was brought up by Tim and Phil. Because my main curiosity of this is, I know there's not much we can do now because it's a state law, but my biggest interest is making sure that homeowners are able to buy homes in the city of Springfield. And the reason I say that is because, we're known for being the city of homes. And, at one point, I don't know what the percentage breakdown of owner occupied, but I do know there's a lot of investors that are outside the city buying up homes. I know that's happening now. And my one concern is that people start doing that with the single family homes, and then you start changing the nature of our neighborhoods. But the question that I had was more around the builders. I don't know the economics of building a house, but if I had to assume, if you're building a house, I don't know if the economics are there to then add an additional dwelling, an ADU, and then sell it. I would imagine somebody's gonna buy a house, hold on to it, and maybe add an ADU to rent it. But I guess the question is more for Brian. What do you see around the economics? I think you might have touched upon it briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Counselor. I think developing housing in Springfield is always a razor-thin margin. Yeah, I would question whether the addition of the additional construction required for an ADU that a developer would actually make it back in the sales price. There may be efficiencies because they're already building the house, where you can build the ADU and it's not costing you too much and you can bump the price up. But I think that remains to be seen whether the money is really going to be there at the end of the day for the value of actually constructing it.
I do have additional questions, but I'll wait till the end, Mr. President.
Thank you, Counselor Delgado. Okay, next on our list is the Building Department. We also have Code Enforcement Housing is separate, but are those, is that one item? Okay. Please. Good, thanks, Mark.
We can't hear.
Oh, okay. My predecessors before me spoke of the gist of it. The only thing I can really add is the impact a little bit here that we're concerned is it opens it up, by not being owner occupied, opens up to investors, which is a concern. House flippers, they're going to pick up these subpar houses and get the idea of maximizing their potential here, which changes the character of the neighborhood. It does cancel the single-family zone res A entirely as far as, but it's something that was dropped in our lap, and a lot of it remains to be seen, like everybody said before me. We're just gonna have to see. As an enforcement, though, this could be a potential nightmare.
Okay.
That's all I really can add. I don't really, anybody have any questions for me? I'll try.
Thank you. Any questions specifically for code?
Yeah, I have one.
Counselor Allen?
So you have a process that's in effect now for somebody requesting an addition or something. Will this go through the
Yes, through the plan,
process?
through the planning tier one review. Everything, any application that comes before me will have to start there, initiate with the planning department for pre-approval. Right. So that is a helper. That does help. So that does help. You know, the first step would be to talk to the planning department.
Bill would be involved in the first step, but
Yep.
all the setbacks and all the building-specific things,
Mm-hmm.
you guys, that would be the same?
It would be the same as the zone it allows. So your smaller lots, your 50 by 100s for a detached accessory dwelling unit would almost be impossible. You know, it'd be your larger lots.
What about the attached?
The attached, there's potential depending on the certain lot and where the existing building is located on the lot. You might be able to do it.
Well, I just have one more question.
You gotta turn your mic on, Counselor Allen.
Sorry, thanks.
Thanks, Sean.
I just lost my train of thought. I'll ask it later when we have
Okay.
when we have question period.
Very good, thank you.
Jerry's here. Hi, Jerry.
Good afternoon, councilors. Jerry McCafferty, Office of Housing. I think as I thought about the impact, there's a few things. One is, first, we know that production of housing is necessary. We are grossly underbuilt and we need units. I see this as a positive for the way that it unlocks rental housing in the suburbs, which I think is a good thing for Springfield. I think the threat to Springfield is one that we've just heard from others, which is institutional investors. So we have seen, so that the concern I have with it is that that both units can be rental. And I think particularly so, there's been some studies that I was just looking at over a 15-year period. 36% of residential properties in Springfield were bought by institutional investors, many of them very large. So this isn't mom and pop kind of investors, but larger investors. And what we see is those entities come in and they tend to really drive up costs. So to the point about Springfield residents being able to buy housing, you know, if this and I don't know how it will be seen from the point of an institutional investor, more than an ADU in the backyard, I think of the likelihood of a basement apartment, and I don't know if that becomes something that's appealing and that would be supporting movement of more homes that could be bought by local residents to institutional investors. The one thought I have about that is it is a legislative response, but it may be, I think those concerns are particular to gateway cities. So it may be that to think about an exception for gateway cities in terms of requiring owner occupancy.
Thank you, Jerry. We're joined also by Councilor Govan and Councilor Brown. Councilor Brown has his hand raised, but Councilor Davila is first. So Councilor Davila.
Good evening, Jerry. Good to see you. I just want to be clear. Did you say 35% of the housing stock is rented?
No.
No.
36% of properties that were sold over a 15-year period were purchased by institutional investors.
So those properties, are they more?
They're both apartments and single, 2-3-family homes. It's every type of residential home.
Including single family?
Sorry?
Including single family homes?
Including single-family homes.
Is
Yes.
there any way that you can further break that down into specifics?
I
I'm particularly
don't-
concerned with the single family homes.
Right, I think that's, as
Yeah.
everyone is.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I haven't seen that data, no.
Is there any way that we can parse that? Any smart person that can do that?
To find the data?
Yeah, 'cause I really would like
I
to know
mean, yes,
exactly.
it's analyzing data from the Warren Group, but it is combing through that data. There was a group that did this on a statewide basis, which is where I got that statistic from.
Is there any way they can further get that for us, specifically the single
I
family?
don't know if they've done it by single-family homes.
I'm sorry?
I don't know if they've analyzed it that way. I am happy to look.
Yeah, if you don't mind, please.
Yes.
I'm really interested as to what that looks like, particularly for the single family homes.
Yes.
Mr. President, if you allow me, I just have a quick question for Phil. Oh, sure, no problem. That's not a problem. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a question, it's maybe Phil or Jerry. I was curious as far as the actual colleges. That's kind of like some of the concerns I've heard. Are the colleges able to purchase these homes and add units to them? And not just the colleges, I would even go as far as like other agencies. So say like the colleges, Mass Mutual, like there's different entities out there, especially the colleges in certain areas, that, if they're obtaining a home, I know they can, just as far as there'd be an influx of student housing. So is there anything as far as the college stuff?
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, a college, it's since the owner occupancy requirement is gone, then it's any entity who wants to purchase a single family home. You think of Wennick, who is probably, or Western New England University, which is surrounded mostly by Residence A. That kind of pops to mind. Certainly, they could purchase single-family homes and turn them into single-family homes with accessory dwelling units, absolutely.
And I know as far as a lot of the off-campus housing, you'll get people who really will complain because during certain times of the year, they'll have parties and things like that. So it's really a concern to me to have like a school like Winnick and its buying power being able to now obtain them homes and putting more dwellings. There's nothing we can do about that stuff?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, that's concerning. Thank you, Mr. President.
Phil, 1 second. Councilor Davila, did you want to give your question to Phil now that we got him back up here? Yeah. You got to put your microphone back on, please.
How you doing, Phil? Good to see you.
Good.
So we had discussed, and I believe the solicitor also felt, we were in the kind of sync on the same wavelength, the possibility of creating some sort of fee structure for ADUs where they pull out the permits. Where are we with that?
Well, I had a conversation with Mark today about that, because I don't deal with a lot of fees in my office, so I'm not exactly sure. I believe it's the city council that implements fees for building permits and stuff. So again, as I mentioned before, when we originally added site plan reviews and planning board site plan reviews, it was part of the larger changes to the ordinance, so we didn't feel it was appropriate to add fees to those at the moment. But I know other communities have fees for administrative site plan reviews. You certainly, if it's the council's prerogative to add that,
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause if I'm not mistaken, the conversation that I had with the solicitor, and I know he's not here, was that that's within your purview that you could institute that yourself. If I hear correctly, I think you're saying is you feel more comfortable if we do that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I believe it's the city council. Again, I got to defer to the law department or building.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure how fees get implemented. So
Okay.
if it's through the planning, if it's through the Office of Economic Development, I can certainly
Right.
have those down. I just don't know what it is.
Because I'm looking at this as at revenue. I've been talking about revenue for a while now. And listen, if I can get revenue money out of a rock, I will, because God knows we're going to need it. And so every little bit helps. And I am helping basically on pushing for some sort of a fee structure on this. I don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah, and I just, again, want to stress,
yeah.
there's certainly the building department fees are going to be in place. So all those fees for an addition or
Yeah.
electrical, plumbing, all those fees are
But-
certainly
Yeah, but
will be added.
you have a small department, and if we're going to have your precious time reviewing this, I want to make sure that the city is appropriately compensated. And so, Phil, I'm going to follow up with the solicitor on this. I don't know what that looks like, but I think a reasonable fee is not out of place. If somebody has the money to spend, I think you say $80,000, $90,000, getting a couple $100 out of that, it's a good thing, in my opinion. And I think you'll say we only have one application so far, is that correct?
So far, I've only received one.
And that was for a single family?
Single family proposing an addition to a home. So they went through the process, submitted the plans, and were approved.
Just out of curiosity, so it's going to be in addition to the house itself?
Correct.
Okay.
They had the room on the side of the property to add an addition.
Gotcha. All right, thank you, Phil. I will follow up with you on the solicitor on the fee structure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. Councilor Whitfield, any questions for Jerry or Phil?
It was more to whoever Counselor Brown was talking to about ADUs on college properties. I don't know if that was Jerry or Phil.
Yeah.
That is also a concern. I just wanted to comment that there's always something we can do. We can talk to state legislators and write to the governor's office for anything, even investors coming in and having it be owner occupied. So there's always something that we can do, but that's concerning to me because and I don't know if you answered this because I was a little bit distracted, but if they did build the ADU, then it's still not taxable?
Oh, I'm not sure I can answer that question. I'm not sure.
We have assessors coming up.
Yeah,
next.
I can't answer that. I don't know. Sorry.
Well, I hope assessors can hear me, but that's the question, so I'll wait until they come up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Walsh, anything for Phil or Jerry? You're
I
muted.
think the question would be for Phil. It's a follow-up to what Councilor Davila just brought up about a fee. Personally, I don't think I would support a fee. It sounds discriminatory to me. But what I would like to know is if you have enough personnel, if all of a sudden this takes off, do you need another position to deal with this?
Well, I'm not going to say no, but I mean, again,
How many positions do you need?
I mean, it's hard for me to stand here and say that. I mean, in a month and 2 weeks, I've had one application. If
Right.
40 of them show up tomorrow, I'm in trouble. But so far, I haven't gotten that. So, I mean, they're not overly onerous to complete. Again, but even the first one we did, wanting to make sure we dotted the i's and crossed the t's, I went back and forth for a week and a half, 2 weeks with the gentleman proposing it to make sure the plan met all the requirements. So it does take some time, but again, so far I've had one. I've had 15 calls, but one application.
But in your current budget or in your wish list for this year's budget, are there additional personnel?
I don't believe so.
Okay, like lots of things to discuss then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Walsh. Councilor Click Bruce.
Hey, Phil, don't go away. So, quick question, and I may have missed it, but you talk about the process. I know you say you have 15 that you have one application that kind of came through. And I know this is a state mandate pretty much. Part of this process, does it come before the city council? And I'm not necessarily saying for approval, but at some point, do we get to take a look to say, everything checks and balances at that point, or it just goes to the city's office and you guys sign off of it and then we don't know nothing about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the short answer is it's an administrative site plan review. The only caveat to that is if somebody wanted to do a second ADU, it does trigger a special permit through the city council. But one ADU is strictly an administrative site plan review that comes to us, and then, they're treated as a single-family house.
Right. So, yeah, thank you for just wanted that point of clarification. That just, to me, Council President, that's just gonna cause some issues, because a lot of times we're not even gonna know that these are going on, and I think our residents are going to see these coming up, and they're gonna be asking us questions. And our questions, well, we don't know anything about it. So I just wanted to get that on the record. So that's one of my concerns. I don't know if we can do some amendments or lobby the state legislation to at least come back before the city council and let us, see the applicants that are being approved by the city. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Delgado?
It's not for you, Phil. You can sit down.
Is it for Jerry?
It's for Jerry.
Okay.
Jerry, you brought up a point and something that I was thinking about last year when you brought up institutional. What is your definition of an institutional investor? Because I've been thinking something even before ADUs in terms of how do we slow down the rapid increase of prices here. And my focus has been because we have a lot of outside folks buying up our properties. That's been kind of one of my focuses. So I guess I'm trying to understand your definition.
I think it has to do with, and this is, I am learning myself more about this. I think it has to do with how many properties they own, where it is. And it typically is more about buying and selling the house as opposed to buying it, holding it, and having it be an ongoing income property. And it is that regular over and over transactions that really drives up costs.
Because I've read a lot of articles of big conglomerates buying up properties. I don't know, to the point earlier about data and what data you have access to. I'd like to see data that you have available, but also just understanding who is that 36%, right? Who does that make up? Because obviously we have mom and pop folks that are fixing, flipping, right? That's not my concern, especially if a lot of them live here or live in the area versus folks that don't live not even in the state, so.
I will say it's a complex thing to pull the data because often they create a different LLC to buy each property. So what we saw was somebody did a lot of work to try to figure out who were behind the LLCs to bring the data together. It was pretty, I think, a labor-intensive
I'll probably
project.
request.
But I'm happy to share the report. It was done by MAPC out in Boston, but they did the data look at everywhere in the state.
Got it. I'll probably be emailing you more.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilor Govan?
Thank you, Mr. President, and my apologies for being late.
Okay.
I thought we started at 6. You guys started early. So we're talking about ADUs. So from my understanding, and this could be either for Jerry or for Phil, so they're automatically going to be approved if they apply. Once they apply, because the city can't deny it.
Well,
is
yeah,
that true?
I don't want to say they're automatically approved. I mean.
So tell me how, well, you said they have to apply for the permit, make the request, and you went through a process of about 2 weeks with the one that you just approved.
Right, there's an application, and as part of that application, they have to submit plans,
So what in their plans would make them ineligible?
They're 5 feet away from the setback instead of 10 feet.
Okay, okay,
They have a rear addition that's 25 feet instead of 30.
all right.
Or it's too, the plan that I got was the addition was too large. He started with a 920 square foot addition.
Okay, so they would have to tone it down or whatever. So, I know this is concerning to our residents, and especially in certain neighborhoods, because they don't really want to, maybe see a lot of this. And then we don't really know what it's going to look like in the end necessarily. I don't know that everybody's gonna have an ADU in their yard. It doesn't seem like it.
No, I'm not sure everyone will, but
It's possible.
it's possible. Again, assuming you have the square footage, that's the biggie. So
Right.
Indian Orchard, I'm not sure you're going to have many of them.
Right.
But 16 acres, you certainly, if you've got a large backyard with a large setback,
Now,
sure.
and of course, they would have to abide, whoever's going to be living in that property has to abide by our ordinance laws in the city as far as the quality of life.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Now, how are colleges monitored for that, for them following the ordinance laws that we have?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I think it's more of somebody gets a call that there's 40 kids in a house.
Yeah, because that's concerning to me.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
that was
under
brought
our
up.
ordinance, there is a limit to how many people you can rent to. Again, I'd have to defer to building about, what size, a 900 square foot, I don't know how many people can live in that or versus a 500 or 400, so, but there are, according to our zoning, a family is no more than 4 unrelated people, so that's what's
Okay.
supposed to be the limit. I know there's areas, because I've heard from other colleges that there are more kids in there,
There
but
are, yeah.
that is, that's really more of a code enforcement issue.
Right, so that might be something that we might want to look at and see if we could get code enforcement to kind of like, maybe ramp that up on the college campuses, AIC, Springfield College, Western New England possibly. And then also, I think to Counselor Click Bruce's statement, somehow, I don't know if there's a way for us to request that they, maybe as a courtesy, go to the neighborhood council and let them know of their plans, being mindful the neighborhood council would have to know that they have no say in it necessarily.
Well, I guess that's my big concern is notifying neighborhood councils and the city council. Suddenly you get the assumption that there's something I'm going to do to be able to stop it.
Right, and
And that's what I want to make sure is perfectly clear.
right.
And so I guess if there's a way to do that, that's fine. I'm a little leery of doing that for that simple reason.
And that's understandable, and that's why I said, the city council, the citizens council has to be clear that they have no say necessarily. All they're doing is, as a courtesy, we're letting you know, this is what we plan on doing.
I mean,
And
I can
that's it.
certainly send out the approved applications to the city council if that's what the council wants. I can
That
certainly
would
do
be-
that
I
as
think
well.
that would be
I mean,
good.
again, that doesn't mean that they're getting building
Right.
permits yet, because even the one that I've
Right.
approved, they have not gone to the building permit.
Right, so they
And
have to
and
go
I
through that
believe-
process.
I believe the administrative site plan review gives them 2 years to do that.
Okay, so I think that's a good idea, if we could at least notify the city council, and then maybe the neighborhood council of where it's going to. I don't know if there's a way, like right now, businesses, when they're coming into our neighborhoods, as a courtesy, they go to the neighborhood councils, unless there's a zone change they're requesting, then they have to go
Yeah,
and get
and again,
approval.
yeah.
I don't know, something like that, but I feel like, we should be aware, because our constituents are gonna be asking us questions, and well, hey, what's that building going up in that person's yard all of a sudden? And a lot of people aren't really listening to this. They're not aware that this is happening necessarily. So, us knowing maybe at least what's going on, and then letting them know, well, that this is the state law, there's nothing we can do about it, but just do, I guess, quality of life calls if necessary. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Govan. Councilor Davila.
Thank you, Mr. President. Phil, just kind of following the sort of same subject as Councilor Click and Councilor Govan. I think you said that you could make available the applications to the council. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to send it.
Right. Yeah.
It's public information.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get some sort of brainstorming here with you as we're talking, because this is brand new to all of us. And so I think that whether it's the application or some sort of I'm going to call it a report for lack of better words, where we can identify any trends that are happening throughout the city. Because maybe I'm looking too much into the future, but I'm concerned as to once this is up and going and it becomes a success, it's going to spread like wildfire. And we have those, to use Jerry's words, institutional investors who may or may not start building these ADUs. And the end result, in my opinion, is that we are looking at a potential population increase in Springfield. And that's going to have consequences to our system, particularly to the school department, to the hospitals, fire, police. It's going to be a burden. It's going to be a potential burden to the city. And so I guess you do this more often than me, Phil. If we can identify a way or start tracking trends, I know we're just getting started, I think it will be very wise for us to do that so that we can see if in any particular part of the city, we have more applications or more interest in ADUs and why that is. Because I am concerned also that we may have overpopulation in some neighborhoods, particularly the ones that are highly of rental nature. So those are my thoughts. If you have anything you want to share, you're more than welcome, Phil.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm happy to, again, I keep track of the ones that will come in, so we'll have a base of where they're going. Again, I see these more in areas that have the larger lots because those are going to allow additions, but again, even on a 5,000 square foot lot, I could convert my basement.
But what would be easier for you? So instead of forwarding the applications or just giving us a quarterly?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll see how, I guess
Whatever's easier for you.
It's hard for me, if there's one every 6 months, that's certainly easier than.
Right.
So I don't know. Well,
Okay.
I think we'll have to see how it goes to figure out what's the best way to
Yeah,
track
that's what you
this.
said before, yeah, but, all right, I just putting that on the record because I am very concerned of the potential impact in increased population that we may or may not face with these ADUs. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Davila, Councilor Santinello, and then after that, I'm going to cut off the questions until we finish the presentation so we have time to finish up. Councilor Santinello.
Thank you. I think basically this is a question for the chairman of the pilot committee. As far as these colleges and nonprofits that own properties in the city, if you build an ADU on that property, then that ADU will be tax exempt also?
That's probably more of a question for Patrick Greenhall, and he's up next. So do you mind, Councilor Santinello, if he answers that?
I don't mind. I don't mind.
Okay, Patrick, you're up. So you can answer that and do your presentation, please.
Sure. So yes, in short, if a university builds an ADU and it's used for college students, that would be exempt. I'll keep my presentation pretty brief because this is fairly straightforward from a Board of Assessor point of view. Our goal is to assess all properties at full and fair cash value, and that would include any accessory dwelling units that are created going forward. So nothing would really change from our point of view, but the college question is yes, they would remain exempt. But I'm happy to field any other
basically,
questions.
just to follow up on that, how many college properties are we talking about, or nonprofits that own property, housing in the city of Springfield? What are we talking about? And how much is the city losing in assessed value, taxes?
I don't know that number off the top of my head for tonight, but I know that did come up in the pilot committee, and I'm happy to send that to you and the rest of the city council as well.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Councilor Perez?
Could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question was, because I was reading at the act, so a single family addition, will any taxes will be increased by that addition at all?
Yes, we have to determine full and fair cash value of all properties. So we don't know exactly how this is all going to play out, but certainly you could assume if somebody creates an accessory dwelling unit in their house, that they would be able to then sell that for more money with the accessory dwelling unit. So going forward, you would think that the value would increase, and we're going to know that from market data. We're going to know that from the cost to build these things. But yes, if somebody builds an ADU accessory dwelling unit on their property, their total value will go up, and thus their tax bill will likely go up also.
And my concern was reading at the act, it says it could impose from 1% all the way to 5%. How will you determine that? Looking at the bill.
I don't know what percent you're talking about. I'm sorry. Can you clarify
When
that?
yes, when it's a single family addition, according
Okay.
to the bill, you could do from a 1% to a 5%. How will you determine it's based on the addition? How would that go since it's a new concept?
I guess I'm not really sure what that percentage is. So 1% to 5% of what, I'm not
So
sure.
of the addition, how are you going to measure that?
Okay, yeah, we're going to go just by the square footage. So we'll go
Okay.
measure how many
Okay.
square feet are there
Okay.
to determine the total living area and what the value should be.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcome.
Thank you, Counselor Perez. Attorney Shea?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that it was raised, could the city charge fees? We certainly have the ability, departments have the ability to charge a fee. And the planning department, if it incurs extra costs, could petition the city council to authorize the fees. And as long as they weren't punitive, designed to try to restrict the ADUs, then I think it would be perfectly legal. We have fees for other items that have to be done, so there'd be no reason why we couldn't do it here.
Thank you, Attorney Shea. Okay, next up is DPW. Mr. Signoli, I think, is online. There you go, Chris. You have the floor.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Actually, Council Brown brought up the major point that I was going to be looking at, and my concern from a development perspective from a DPW is going to be the college size, especially Western New England, Springfield College, where we are having problems with those areas right now and with on and off street parking. So one of the things that we are going to be looking at is that when we see a plot plan that needs to come in front of us, it doesn't say anything in the rules and regulations that I see that talks about parking. And when somebody comes in with a house that they're going to be building in the city of Springfield, they're required to have X amount of parking. And I think that is going to be an issue on some of these moving forward, where we have a major problem right now at some of these college houses throughout the city, where you do have 5, 6, 7 people there, meaning you have 5, 6, 7 cars. So I think the parking issue is going to be a big one, as well as just the number of, especially on the college side, where these are, when I say short term, you're basically talking about a 1-year rental to be able to squeeze more students into some of these properties. And especially when, as Phil said, when you get into 16 acres, the zoning out there is a lot bigger. So being able to do either an addition or a unit or something within a home, if they haven't done it already, is going to probably have a lot of these owners looking to do that. But I think in the end, the problem that we're going to see is going to be, from a DPW perspective, is going to be a lot of parking issues, a lot of on-street parking, which means that we're going to get, we being us and the police, are going to get a lot more complaints of people who are, parking in front of other people's homes, which isn't illegal. However, in a certain areas on some of the side streets off of Wilbraham Road, there could be 15 cars parked in front of 2 houses, which cause, that becomes a quality of life issue with regard to the immediate residents who really don't have anything to do with the college. We get a massive uptick of complaints right after school starts. So if this does move forward and we see some of these people trying to squeeze in more students in some of these homes, because I'm sure they're charging, upwards of anywhere between $600 and $1,000 a month for their rent, it's going to end up being a positive cash flow from a development perspective.
Thank you, Chris. Counselor Brown has his hand up. I'm going to just retract my gag order on the questions. It's not working out, so we'll just keep going. Counselor Brown, go ahead.
Yes, Chris, I just had a I just talking about the actual parking. I just had a barrage of complaints over on them side streets again. What is going on with the signage? Like Moreland Street. There's people, residents who park there, and now they're getting ticketed. How does that work over there? I mean,
Around,
they haven't ticketed for 20 years, and now they're ticketed once in a
right,
while.
in a lot of all those streets, especially around AIC and some around Springfield College, have restricted parking from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. to ensure that students don't park on the street. And
And but
all those streets there have had that regulation there for 20 to 25 years. So somewhere
but
along the
Chris,
way, there must have been a complaint because I'm assuming we don't write those tickets, the police do. So I'm
yeah,
assuming that there were some complaints of people parking on the street who weren't getting tickets.
Chris, is there a way we can fix that and have residents, because there's residents there who are suffering, and it was an issue in the past, and it's now still becoming an issue. It's never been fixed. As far as AIC, they have actually altered all the parking over there with the actual residents. With the housing and the parking, this stuff is an issue. We have to change the parking over there to at least help the residents, because the residents are getting tickets now. Is there some way we can have resident parking?
Well, resident parking is illegal. And you can't have resident parking, and especially on a street like Dunmoreland Street, where everybody's got driveways. And so having resident parking, it has to go through the legislature to be able to do that. And then there has to be proof that there's no parking, or
Well,
excuse me,
Chris,
no on private property parking. The only one in the city that has it right now is Mattoon Street. And the
yeah,
reason they were approved because they have no off-street parking whatsoever for their facility. So it becomes an issue that then has to go through the legislature, and it's time consuming, and it's something that an entity, whether it's the city or the residents, have to do that. But when we've rescinded some of those in the past, we then end up getting complaints that now students can park there all day without having to move their vehicle. And so it's which one do you want at this point? If somebody has an idea of what we can do, I'm fine with it, but the major reason that was done is to ensure that the students don't park on the streets all day.
Well, Chris, what's going on over there is that in that particular area, those are 2-3 family homes. So as far as the actual parking in the driveway, how they design, it's not adequate parking. So you will get occasionally the residents over there who will park there. I mean, I can tell you at least 95%. So it was probably in the middle of the Moreland Street, far enough away from the college. So it has to be still something we can do, because what we're doing now is we're actually altering all the parking for an actual college entity and not taking in consideration the actual residents, and that's unfair. So I would really like to have a meeting, a committee meeting. I'll talk to you later, but we have to get those streets in order, because to sit there and tell the residents that they can't park there because of the college is still, I mean, we're gonna let the colleges build houses, and this is gonna get worse. Thank you, Mr. President.
I agree.
Thank you, Councilor Brown. Councilor Whitfield?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Brown, for saying all that. That actually makes a lot of sense. It handicaps our residents from being able to park where they live. And I just think that we give too many resources to the colleges as it is. They get a lot more leeway than newer developers is trying to improve the neighborhoods that they live in. So I agree with that, and we need to consider our residents more. My question, I don't know if it's for Phil or Chris, but when they're doing the plan, do we take into consideration any of the Title V requirements, like the sewer, the water increasing, any of that on the plan, or they just have to give a design and you say, okay, the design meets the criteria, but do we actually check into the increase in water and sewer or any of that type of stuff?
Phil?
Well, if they're using a septic system, then Title V absolutely comes into play, but I don't believe Title V plays in if you've got sewer. So obviously an ADU is having new bathrooms and new kitchens, so any of the water and sewer connections absolutely need to be made. Again, if they're adding additional parking to a lot, then DPW reviews those plans. Just on a quick note, Chris had mentioned he didn't see parking. There is a requirement if you're doing an ADU, you do have to have one additional parking spots. That's all the city can ask for under the legislation. But again, that's for as far as the plans go. The water itself, obviously when you're building a new house, you do have to show that the water that's coming off of your house is remaining on site. You no longer can just let it roll down the driveway into the streets anymore. So I would assume with an addition, that really is where it's going to play in, is with an addition. If you're just doing your basement, it wouldn't trigger, or if you're adding additional parking. But again, Title V itself is only going to trigger if you actually have a septic system.
Oh, septic system, okay. And for like basements that people are converting, they have to have their own individual entrance, right?
Correct. An ADU has to have a direct entrance, either has to have a direct entrance to the outside, or it can share an entrance with an interior corridor. So as part of the approval process, we do have them submit an interior layout showing where your egresses are. So they do show us that they have the actual egress. And again, if you're turning all the egresses and connections to this, if you're doing it in the basement, all have to meet the underlying building code. So in addition to my review, which is simply more of the site plan review, all the underlying building codes have to go through the building department after they receive approval from my end.
Gotcha. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. Councilor Perez?
No, I just listening, and this is being a new model. I know a family that probably is going to come up for a request for this particular program. And my concern going back to the taxes is that the reason they are going because they got a sick mother, they don't want to put them in a rehab place. But my biggest concern is the taxes, because we pay a lot of taxes as it is in the city, and having to do this and having it on a commercial matter versus a family matter, that's why I have the concern. And as a city council member, and I got to echo what my colleague Bruce said, that we don't have no say so. That's why I was asking the methodology of the taxes itself. So I want to put that on record. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Perez. Okay, we have two more departments. Law is next. Attorney Shea, do you have anything to add to the discussion we've had so far? Ken?
Okay, I'm sorry, I had my mic off. At this point, I don't have anything else that I can add. I think some of the areas we could look into would be the safety issue dealing with exits, especially in basements, whether or not one exit is enough when you've got separate people in there. And maybe in the building codes, we could look in there on some of the stuff. But right now, I don't have anything else that I can add to the conversation.
Thank you, Ken. And last but not least is fire. We have Commissioner Calvi here. Thank you.
Good evening, councilors. How's everyone doing? Good, good. So I've got the series of questions here, and the first one, what impact does this legislation have on your area? And fire safety issues associated with accessory dwelling units are multifaceted and primarily revolve around the following things. One is risk of fire spread, compliance with the basic fire regulations, defensible space considerations, which are areas around the house that could increase fire spread, egress and emergency access to the dwelling, and then other impacts like the increased water flow that we would need to fight a well-involved fire if this was added on to a house or a separate unit in the backyard. So those are all some of the basic problems that are associated with it. The next one was, do you have concerns about the legislation and how it will impact Springfield? And the answer is yes, I do have concerns about how accessory dwelling units will create a fire safety issue. These are tight neighborhoods as it is. Today we had an illegal outside burning that damaged 5 residences from a little solo stove in the backyard. So you add 900 more square feet in someone's backyard, that is really going to cut down the clearances we have around some of these houses, and it will increase fire spread, and it will lead to fire spreading beyond the original building or lot if they start packing them in too tightly in some of these neighborhoods. These are already densely populated areas, and I know some of the lots are going to be too small to have these, but you take a lot where you can just squeeze one in the backyard, then it's going to increase the fuel load by that much and help aid in fire spread. I've spoken with other departments in the area, and a lot of them do have the same concerns about fire spread and safety of the occupants and being able to make adequate egress and entrance and exit of these buildings, because it's going to be hampered if you have a unit that's attached to an already single-family home and they attach an addition on it that's got a blind access coming off a hallway. It's going to be difficult at 3 o'clock in the morning with zero visibility to find that door as we come in looking for somebody if there's a fire in the main residence, and then trying to protect the occupants that we may not know are there in the auxiliary building unit. Next, have you heard of any good ideas? All communities are dealing with this issue as it passed with little to no input from public safety. This was all done with the building trades and the legislature, so there weren't a lot of stakeholders at the table from public safety when this went through the legislature and was signed into law. And the last one was, what actions do I believe we should take? I believe there needs to be adequate zoning and spacing. The spacing needs to be increased. A minimum of 10 feet is not enough to protect the main building or the auxiliary building unit from fire spread if it's a well-involved fire before we get the call. And a lot of times in some of the neighborhoods, we do get delayed calls on structure fires, and neighbors or passerbys call them in, and this could really hinder us in a response to a fire and such a thing. The ratings of these structures are standard building construction. If it's more than 10 feet, you can have vinyl siding and things of those natures. I think if we're going to allow, which we have to allow, auxiliary dwelling units in the city, they need to be made to be more fireproof to help inhibit the spread of fire from building to building. And my last thing is that adequate egress and adequate access to the backyard building units or accessory dwelling units is going to really hinder our response to these buildings. If you've got a 5,000 square foot lot with a 1,500 square foot house on it, you've got a lot of space behind your house where you could put one of these in. Well, we have to access those from the street. So now we're going through into the backyard 200 and 300 feet, maybe, to get to a house from the street and then try to fight a fire back there. So those are some of the concerns I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Calvi. Councilor Davila?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good to see you, Commissioner Calvi. I have 2 questions, but I'm going to try to fold them into one, and maybe this could be a joint question for you and Phil. Commissioner, you were talking about the safety of the occupants. I want to keep my question to the basements, because the basement can also be turned into ADUs.
Yes.
I believe I heard Phil say that you need one entrance. It could be a shared entrance into this particular case will be the basement. Is there anything requires from a fire standpoint to have a separate exit?
There is, especially if you have a basement, the bedroom, you have to have egress windows, or you have to have a second egress out of the basement. You need a second way out.
That was my other question, Commissioner. Can you define for the people at home watching us what's an egress window?
It has to be, an egress window is a window that's dug down in below grade that enables a adult to be able to fit through the window and make egress to main grade.
So that window, in my basement, I have this little square window out. Trust me when I tell you, I'm not gonna fit through that. Trust me. But I'm stuck there, I'm done. But that would be like more like a square window? Is that what you're talking about?
So you would have to dig like a 4x4 dry area out, coming out of your foundation, and then put a large window in that you would be able to crawl through. So you'd have to dig down below grade, probably 4x4 going straight down next to your foundation. That would be like a dry well that you could access out of your basement to get up to main grade and out.
So if somebody doesn't have a different exit out of the basement, they will have to have an egress window,
Yes.
and you will not issue a certificate on otherwise.
That's more of a building department
More building, okay.
that type thing, but in general practices, if you don't have a second egress, you can't usually do the basement.
Yeah, I'm just curious because this is, we all know this is very serious, and I would hate to see somebody get a false idea they can just turn the basement like that into an ADU.
An egress window would primarily strictly be from the sleeping area only, not as a primary entrance and exit. That's the difference there.
Right.
Sleeping quarters.
The criteria for them is minimum off the floor, certain heights, and minimum square footage to allow it. That's all set in stone.
So they will have to either or, I know time's up, but you will have to have either or in order to qualify for an ADU, right? Egress window or a separate exit.
So it's not either. The egress window is from a sleeping area.
Oh, so
Or bedroom, correct. It's not used as a primary exit or entrance at all.
It's an emergency.
It's emergency only, right?
So-
That's why it's restricted to the sleeping area.
So I know my time's up, so basically, if you want to have a basement as an ADU, you have to have
You'd have to
an
have two
egress window.
exits. Two exits if it's over 400 square feet.
And what about the egress window?
What was that?
At the egress window, do you have to have one if you have an exit?
From the sleeping area only, from any
Oh,
bedroom.
sleeping area,
Yeah.
okay, so you need, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. President. Very kind, those are my questions.
Okay, we have public speak out scheduled to take place in 3 minutes. There's one speaker registered to sign up. He has just asked if the council will allow him to withdraw his registration to speak so that we can continue this discussion for another 15 minutes. Is there anybody that objects to us doing that? I don't have any objection with it. I do just want to say, though, for the record, that when somebody signs up for public speak out, we do tell people that there's going to be a speak out, so the public may be expecting that link to start shortly. So we could do it tonight. There's no open meeting law violations or anything, but we just shouldn't make a practice of saying we're going to do a speak out and then canceling it like this. So in this case, it's okay. This is a worthwhile discussion. We'll go forward for another 15 minutes. Councilor Whitfield has a question for Commissioner Calvi, and then we'll get to, do you have a question for Commissioner Calvi? Okay, and then we'll get to Councilor Allen, and then I have some questions and some statements that I'd like to make. So Councilor Whitfield and Councilor Delgado.
It's not for Commissioner Calvi, so I'll let Tim access, and then my question is more around, do we have a revocation law that, I'm really talking about the investor property owner, so if they have 3 code violations, we can revoke the ADU permit and things like that. So my question is more around that.
Well,
I do
so
have a question.
let's address Commissioner Calvi first, and then we'll go back to Councilor Whitfield. So does anybody have another question for Commissioner Calvi?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so Councilor Delgado, and then we'll get to Councilor Walsh.
Thank you. This was brought up by your feedback in terms of the finding the units. I guess this is kind of a hybrid, you and maybe Phil or whomever question. But for ADUs, the examples are attics, basements, garages, another independent buildable. Do we have any idea of what numbering systems we're going to use and whether or not we'll use numbering systems that can help in instances of public safety, help identify something being basement or attic or something like that? I mean, is there...
Generally, the post office assigns the number.
So we have no say in that? Because I was just thinking from a perspective of like you're going to a call in an emergency and you don't know where if it's, 143 Main Street, 143.1 means sub-level, 143, whatever. I'm just thinking from a public safety after you brought that up. So that was my concern.
Good point. I don't know that we have anybody here that can answer. Is there anybody here that feels they got the good answer to that? We'll put that on the...
This is Patrick from the assessors.
Go ahead.
I don't have a great answer, but I think the numbers are assigned from the city engineers department. So they may be able to be a resource for this type of question. That was a fantastic question.
Okay, so stand corrected. It's the city engineers that assign it, not the post office. So we can follow up with that.
I'd love to follow up, thank you.
As a question. Okay, Councilor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. President, and this is for Commissioner Calvi. I mean, you were talking about the basement and extra precautions for the basement. What about the attic? If there's a fire and the ADU is up there, are they going to need extra precautions?
Well, people could easily become trapped in the attic just as well as in the basement. And it becomes an issue of having a second means of egress out of the attic space to be able to adequately escape for it's basically a third floor apartment with only one. You'd need to have two means of egress and exit into there.
I wonder what that would look like.
It could probably be a outside platform, a door that comes out of the attic with a platform and zigzag stairs that come down. I've seen them. They're not too attractive on the side of the house, but if that's what people would want to put on.
But that's not a requirement.
Well, you're going to have a second way to get out, so it's going to be some kind of requirement.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for the fire commissioner? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, BJ. So let's get into general questions. Councilor Whitfield?
I think this is for Phil. How we can revoke ADUs. Is there a policy on that? So for example, the whole slumlord scenario, if they bought property, built it, became a slumlord, got some code violations, can we revoke permits in those instances?
I'm going to defer to the building department. I'm assuming a certificate of occupancy could be, but what's that? Could you revoke a certificate of occupancy?
And you revoke the ADU permit if there's substantial code violations on the main property and the ADU?
Depending on which one, yes. As an enforcement side of it, yes, we have the potential to condemn a unit. Absolutely.
Oh, that's what it is, condemning the unit?
Yep, where it becomes sanitary or building code violations, yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how to keep.
That's just part of that's just our standard enforcement policies, yeah.
From slumlord investors coming in and then building more units. So if there's any code violations on the property that anyone's trying to build the ADU, they would have to correct those first anyway before they can build the ADU. Is that correct?
Correct. Standard code violations, whether it's an illegal unit too, we're probably going to see some of those. Some that are going to try and fall under the radar without getting permits. That's potential. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. Councilor Allen?
Thanks, Mr. President. I just want to acknowledge a couple of people. One is I want to acknowledge Phil. He's been carrying the water on this thing for months. He's answered all our questions. I call him a lot about this, and I think he's done a great job. And appreciate you doing what you've done, and you're going to get a lot of questions probably as a result of this. So thanks, Phil. I also want to acknowledge some Civic Association people who are here. Sean, if you could just raise your hand, Sean. Sean from 16 Acres Civic Association. And in the back row, Frank, Ryan, and Denise from the East Forest Park Civic Association. They've been here pretty much the whole time. I'm not sure if I missed somebody over there on the left, but I just wanted to do that. I appreciate everybody coming out. This is an unorthodox way to solve a problem, an unusual way. We had a committee meeting and we didn't have great attendance at the committee meeting. We did it this way, and for me, it's been valuable. We're here an hour and 20 minutes at this point. So thank you for participating. I know it's unorthodox. I know it's later on Monday, getting home from when you normally get home. We appreciate the efforts. In terms of follow-up, I've been taking notes. I'll talk to Phil. We'll figure out what things we have to follow up on more formally. Also, I want to acknowledge former Councilor Bill Foley. He's been on this thing right from the start. He's also a resident of 16 acres. So thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. I do have a couple of questions and statements I'd like to make. I just made some notes here myself. One question is whether or not an ADU needs to have a separately metered water or electric and gas service. Does any of the city stakeholders here know whether or not that's the case? Maybe Mark, is that a question for you?
Yes, that would fall under standard, like if somebody comes in for a duplex, it's independent. Your water meter would be independent, your gas meter would be independent.
Well, what about the example of the in-law apartment, right? Phil just said the one case we have is someone who built an accessory dwelling unit for his mother-in-law. That unit is going to be required to have a separately metered water, electric.
Right, to be an official accessory dwelling unit, it would classify as an independent, like a two-family dwelling, standard.
Very helpful. Okay, thank you. So the way that I'm thinking about this is we've got the things that we can control now, and we've already passed an ordinance that does a lot, but there's some things that have come up in this conversation that seem to me to be things that we have authority over today. They're not going to make ADUs anything other than as of right, but we did talk about a fee structure for the application. That's something for the council to consider. Another point raised by Councilor Delgado is the post office address assigned by the city engineers and coming up with a ordinance that clearly spells out how that will happen in a logical way. It wasn't discussed, but I'm not aware of anything that would restrict us from having rules about additional inspections on these units. We've talked in the past about having, things similar to a landlord registration ordinance, and that those attempts haven't passed. There's obviously some complexity there, but we could look into codifying some inspection requirements for these units, not just for them to get permitted and turned on air, but on an ongoing basis to make sure that they're operated safely, and acknowledging that it's a departure from our traditional single-family home zoning. And then another thing that we can control that we haven't talked about, and I guess I want Phil for a couple of minutes here, is setbacks. So these units are subject to the setbacks that apply to accessory structures, correct?
Well, they apply to a single-family dwelling.
Okay, so they would be subject to the same setbacks as a single-family dwelling.
Oh, absolutely.
Not an accessory structure, for example, like a garage or a shed.
That's why.
So our setbacks in Springfield for Res A, they're not extreme. What is it, 20, 25 feet setback for side and rear?
10-foot side yards, 30-foot rear yards, and I believe it's a 25-foot front yard.
So one thing for the council to consider, and I'm not passing judgment on whether this is a good or a bad idea, we could change the setback requirements for single-family structures, period, and create a larger setback more akin to maybe some of our suburban counterparts that would apply to new homes and new ADUs alike. And if we did that, then that would shrink the portfolio of properties that could actually be eligible for an ADU. Is that right, Phil?
Yeah, you just got to make sure you're.
I understand that there's implications to it. I'm not passing judgment on whether, that is something we should do, but it is a tool that's in the toolbox if we find that there's a proliferation of these that's problematic or in a way that's much greater than we expected. So the basket of things, in my opinion, that I see that we can control are the post office addresses, inspections, fees, and setbacks. I haven't heard anything else that we can control that we haven't already done. And then there's the basket of things that we can't currently control, but which, with some cooperation from state leaders, we might be able to control. And so what I'm talking about is considering a home rule petition to ask that the state legislature consider whether they would be willing to grant exceptions for Springfield to the Housing Act of 2024 as it relates to ADUs. And the three things that I heard come up, which I think are compelling things to consider, are allowing us to make this restriction so that it is only available to owner occupants, something that the law currently does not allow us to do. Perhaps requesting a carve out more broadly that does not have that provision apply to gateway cities. And there was also discussion about, particularly in a place like Springfield in the Knowledge Corridor, where we've got at least 3 institutions of higher learning, creating, actually 4, creating an exception that would not allow for the utilization of ADUs under the permissive zoning by educational institutions or institutions that are otherwise exempt from zoning under the Dover Amendment. So I see the 2 baskets, things we can control, the tools are limited, but there, and then the things we can't control, but we can ask nicely if the legislature would consider, and those would be much more impactful. And I'm not sure exactly which of those levers we pull right now, but it would seem to me that while there's good reason for the spirit of this legislation, there's also substantial concern about certain aspects of it from the council and the public and the municipal stakeholders. And I think that the council should get together and work with the law department on putting our heads together and putting together a proposal that pulls some or all of those levers that are in the toolbox. That's my 2 cents. So we've got 2 more minutes. Councilor Govan gets one of them, Councilor Davila, and then we'll give Councilor Whitfield the last word.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So one question, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the setback. What does that mean?
So in the residential zone, if you're going to build a single-family home, you can't build it within X feet of a property line.
I see.
And so what I'm saying is that rule is currently in place, let's call it 20, 30 feet. We could increase that amount, which would make it harder to build a single-family home as well, but it would also make it harder to build an ADU.
Okay. And then also I wanted to, I guess, put in your, one of your baskets, the notification to the city council of the applications that Phil gets. I think I would love for us to be able to do that, at least to be aware.
Yep.
Thank you,
That's
Mr.
a tool
President.
too. Thank you. Councilor Davila.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just kind of brainstorming as you were talking about the home rule petitions, I think that perhaps we should explore as a body the possibility of asking the state to exempt Springfield to allow only 1 ADU per household. Because as it is now, they could potentially have up to 2.
But only with a special permit.
Correct.
Which we would be very unlikely to grant.
Correct, but if they have, in other words, to have some sort of mechanism that we just really boil it down to just 1, because I'm concerned with the special permit, what they may open the door to other things, and what the process may look like, where I might be in the future forced to grant the special permit. Just brainstorming as you were talking, give us some thoughts. So, but thank you, Mr. President.
I'll put that on my punch list. Councilor Whitfield, last word.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Phil if he knew that Needham, Mass require owner occupancy certification for ADUD restrictions. So can we do like a deed restriction? And then Newton, Mass also has the same ownership as a primary resident would have to, I guess, stay there. I'm not sure, but have you heard about Needham?
I think.
Well, Needham may have had owner occupancy like a lot of communities did, but I don't believe Needham can now require owner occupancy, but I'm just going by what the law states today. Again, I believe a number of communities around the state required owner occupancy, but I think that's gone with this law.
Longmeadow allows ADUs and there's an owner occupancy requirement, but it's moot.
Right. So even if it's on the books, you can't apply it any longer. And I think the primary dwelling and the owner of the ADU does have to be in common ownership. You can't condoize one of them and sell them off, or change your lot line to create a little parcel and sell that off. Those have to be on the same parcel and under the same ownership.
Okay.
And for the record, I'm just going to say final comment that I will never agree with increasing the setbacks. It's already hard enough for new developers to build on certain lots because of the setback rules that I guess changed not too long ago. And so if that went to city council, I would fight it with everything that I have in me, because it's already difficult enough for new property developers. And that is something I could never agree with. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks.
Thank you. It's not a proposal at this time. Councilor Allen, do you want to have a statement about what we'll do next, if anything? Guess the last.
Well, I'm figuring that I'll look over my notes and create some sort of document that Phil and I can look over and figure out, well, probably with Ken Shea, you know, what are some next steps that we can do here? But we clearly have issues to follow up on, so I'll take responsibility for that. And
Hey, Mike?
Okay.
Mike?
Yes, Attorney Shea.
You know, the fire commissioner brought up a point, and I think we could follow it up with what Councilor Allen just said, but we could, if the fire department could rule that they do not have clear access to the rear property from a safety standpoint, that might be one tool in our quiver that we could use. They'd have to determine if they could safely get into that backyard to put out a fire and not be restricted or blocked because there's cars parked in a driveway. And I think from a safety standpoint, we'd have something to stand on to have that requirement.
Okay, thank you very much. It is 7 o'clock, so we are going to end this committee of the whole. Councilors who are online, please switch to the full city council meeting link. Okay.
Thanks,
that meeting is
everybody.
adjourned.